friends, welcome back to my channel. So today I will be reviewing the book Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Now, it's been a minute since I've done a book review because this is a very long book. It might not look like much, but it's actually over 1,000 pages. As always, I will have the timestamps for my different sections listed down below, but I'm also going to see if I can get it to section off the video itself. We'll see. Wish me luck. So starting with the writing style, I was actually very surprised by how easy this book was to read, given that Cervantes was a contemporary of Shakespeare and that the first part of Don Quixote was published in 1605. I guess I was expecting it to be written more in verse, sort of like Shakespeare and other works that I've read from that particular time period, but it was written just like any normal story. I've also definitely read books written in the mid-19th century that were much denser than this and much more difficult to read. The way this is written reminds me of Tolkien's The Hobbit meets Monty Python. It's satirical and ridiculous while also being quite the adventure. There are many parenthetic expressions throughout the story where the author kind of lets us in on the joke and tells us how things really are. So we'll get the narrative of whatever Don Quixote is doing, and then the author will say, and everybody else thought he was out of his mind, and things like that. The writing has a very conversational tone that lets us just float along the story in a really pleasant way. The intended audience is actually a little bit tricky on this one, and not even just intended audience from the author, but who the audience would be today. So on the one hand, the story is very long, being over 1,000 pages with both parts, and it has extremely small type, at least in my version. On the other hand, this sort of seems like the type of book that would be read to children, picking and choosing chapters, because each chapter is sort of its own adventure, and yeah, sometimes the adventures connect into one grander storyline, but I feel like there's a lot of ones that just stand on their own, and the tone of the story is one that I think kids would really enjoy. It sort of reminds me of children's cartoons from, say, the late 90s or early 2000s, where as a child you watch them and you just think it's funny and silly, but when you're an adult you go back and you get more of the jokes, and sometimes there's deeper meanings and symbolism that you can pick up on that you maybe missed as a kid. As far as the content goes, I should say that it's not really politically correct, but part of that is due to the time period, and part of that is also just due to the satirical nature of the story. So I guess you could say that this book is both a series of fantastical adventures to be read to children at bedtime, while also being a really important piece of classical literature that could be enjoyed by, say, high school students and above. As I said before, the actual story feels very much like a mixture of The Hobbit and Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail. Sort of like in Seinfeld episodes, you get bits and pieces of different adventures that you think are distinct while you're reading, and then by the time you get to the end of the part, the adventures actually come together and you see that really they're all connected. So that's really fun, and I will say that this is definitely more true for part 1 than it is for part 2. Part 2 does this a little bit, but part 1, it's the main focus, that everything is connected in ways that you wouldn't have realized by the time you get to the very end. Along those lines, I definitely enjoyed part 1 more than part 2. I think it was a little bit to do with the humor, because part 1 was a lot more endearing and innocent, whereas part 2, people were more mean-spirited and things were carried a little bit too far with some of the pranks, whether those were things that Don Quixote was doing or things that were being done to him. There was also the meta aspect of part 2, which I don't know, maybe that was intentional and a type of commentary done by the author to reflect the way he felt while writing it. But in the story, we end up with the book of Don Quixote Part 1 having been written and introduced into the world that the characters are living in, and so they're reacting to the way that they were viewed in the story and reacting to the way that others are reacting to the story. So there's a lot going on there, and usually I enjoy meta-type stories, but in this particular case, I didn't actually enjoy it as much as I did when the characters were just acting on their own in their own little worlds. On Goodreads, I just rated the entire story the same rating, but I think that honestly, part 1 was either a 4.5 or a 5 out of 5 stars to me, because it was so inspired, and so well done. Whereas part 2, I would say would be closer to a 3.5, honestly. So that rounded out my rating to a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, which you can find my Goodreads linked down below if you like to follow me. Now, I would be remiss if I did not include how this story has impacted popular culture today. In season 10 of Supernatural, there is an episode where Castiel gets his grace back from Metatron. So Metatron is the scribe of God who loves stories more than anything else, except maybe his own personal power and gain. So it turns out that Castiel's grace is being stored in a library, and there's a series of clues that he has to follow in order to retrieve it. And how it turns out is that his grace is being stored in a copy of Don Quixote. Likewise, in the TV show The Expanse, the crew named their ship the Rocinante after Don Quixote's somewhat noble steed. The pilot episode of this show is titled Dulcinea, and there's even another episode in season 1 titled Windmills. These are both references to very famous aspects of Don Quixote, so just in case anything was missed by the name of the ship, they made sure that people knew what they were referring to. In addition, the word quixotic, which I will show the definition down here, comes from Don Quixote. So, idealistic, impractical, those are definitely words to describe our Knight of the Rueful figure. It's also worth noting how pop culture influenced the story at the time. This particular copy has lots of annotations throughout the story. While some of these annotations just discuss names of places or people, a lot of them reference other books and stories that were popular at the time that this book came out the first time. There are certain things that Cervantes' audience would be familiar with just by being alive at the time that we probably don't know about. Now, if you're an expert on Spain at this particular time in history, this would probably be a really fun experience reading for you, but for the standard individuals who are not experts, there's a lot there that probably just goes over our heads. Even with all of the annotations, it's just a lot. But honestly, that's probably something that made it all the more popular at the time that it was written. Which, in the introduction, it is noted that this was a popular book at the time. So that probably has to do a little bit with the way that part 2 is written, as Cervantes likely felt he had to write it, instead of being inspired the way he was with the first part. It did make me smile to see how many times the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid were referenced in the story, as I decided to read those first. So I'm finding that that was a very good decision. I guess they call them classics for a reason, right? In closing, I started this book on January 20th and finished it on February 25th, which honestly I don't think is so bad for a 1,050-page story. I should also note that I started and finished 5 other books in the time that I was reading this. For me, Les Mis still takes the cake as being the densest, most difficult book I have ever read, and that includes college textbooks. And I'm in grad school. I digress. So, overall, I'm just very glad that I decided to finally pick up this book. The size of it kind of scared me, which doesn't make sense because I read a lot of big books, but I don't know, I just didn't know enough about it. All I knew was that it was referenced so much in pop culture. So I thought, okay, you know what? No time like the present, let's finally read this book. and I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it to any and all who have not read it yet. Though, again, part 1 may be perfectly adequate for most readers to read that and not read part 2, though that's up to you. It depends on how much you enjoy reading. I enjoy reading for the sake of reading, but I think more than that, I have sort of a FOMO when it comes to stories, and this is a tangent, but I feel like including it. This isn't a very long video. I can't fall asleep during movies, not because of the sound, but because I feel like I might miss something. And some people are perfectly happy to go on to Wikipedia or watch a YouTube summary of a movie after they've seen it, but I need to see it for real. I need to know if there are references, if there are things that are referred to that I need to see that will come up later. This is true for TV shows as well. I can't do the thing where you skip episodes that are not relevant to the plot. I need to watch them. I need to watch all of the episodes of a series. I don't necessarily need to finish the series if I am then bored by it, but if I am going to watch a series, I am not going to be skipping episodes. Okay, tangent over. There you have it. I read Don Quixote and those are my thoughts. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought about it. If you've read it, have you read it? What books do you think that I should read next and add to my to-be-read pile? The book that I'm currently working on right now is Dante's Inferno. I will likely do a video on that. It depends on how strongly I feel regarding it because I don't do reviews on all of the books that I read, since some of them would probably only be 2-minute reviews. I only do reviews on the books that I feel some type of emotion about. And Don Quixote, I didn't feel super strongly about it, but it was a long enough book that I felt it warranted a review. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time. Bye!